Right, Lynn, we have a question shifting across the Pacific here. This comes from a Beijing-based scholar who has been following your work for many years now. And he is, for various obvious reasons, quite anxious to get your response and is concerned about the consequences of the issues he's raising in his question. So he says, Mr. LaRouche, China has made Shanghai a free trade zone. This is the first experimental stage for eventual liberalization of the Chinese economy, a liberalization which, I believe, carries certain risks. This will be a main topic at the upcoming session of the party leadership this November. It's being done now in response to the fact that most Asian nations have indicated a willingness to join Washington's Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which was specifically directed against China. So while China is not formally excluded from the TPP, entry would require a much greater liberalization of the Chinese economy. But at the same time, being left out of the TPP could also have serious repercussions on the Chinese economy. So what then are the dangers China incurs by further liberalization of China's economy? And what can China do to avoid this dilemma?
There is no way, by accommodation to that liberalization conception, which would not lead to the destruction of the nation of China at a very rapid rate. But let's look at the reality of this situation, because what he describes is the usual view shared among nations, and among cowardly nations in particular. I mean, look what happened in Japan. They canceled all nuclear power. Now, that probably will not stick, but a certain faction in Japan did ram that through. And doing that will destroy Japan. That is continuing to ban nuclear power in Japan will cause the collapse of Japan, because there's no substitute available for it. Inherently, nuclear power is inherently far more efficient than any other form of power being used in the world today. Thermonuclear fusion takes us into a completely different dimension. Now, China's problem is, in part, that Europe is collapsing. The nations of Europe are about to die. And I mean die. Germany is one of the last holdups. Look what happened in all these nations in the Euro system. They're all dying. And there's nothing in process that's going to stop them from dying except canceling that Euro system and going back to actually a credit system, not a monetary system. Now, what's needed in China has lived to a certain point. It's coming to a point where things are bad. For a while, China was left alone, pretty much left alone from Washington and Britain and so forth. But that was a temporary arrangement. Now, what happened is China got the production, means of production of automobiles and so forth there. That was a temporary arrangement. The next step of this thing from now, it's going to go in the opposite direction. They're going to try to shut down China. And if China goes with a liberal program, China will be destroyed. Actually, the only solution now on the planet as a whole is to use thermonuclear fusion we can't get it fully installed as a going economic tool right now. But we have to go through a process of activating thermonuclear fusion, which may take several years to even begin to get what we have to get. But it's feasible. There's nothing about, you don't have to prove it can happen. It will work. But the problem is to get the skills and machinery and so forth and the experimental work done to do it. So we have to say now, and China too, because Europe is hopeless right now. Europe has no possibility of actually being a going economy. None. It's gone. Russia probably is one of the most likely success cases in Europe. And it's in trouble. But the problem now, and that's been shown, the problem now is that we cannot, in a bankrupted United States, which is what it has done, since young Bush came into the presidency, the United States has been on the way to hell. And it's been getting worse all the time. And Obama is the very worst thing we've seen so far. Anybody who says they like Obama, they must be insane. So therefore, the point is, our objective must be, particularly with respect to China, China is the most important reference point right now economically for the United States. But it has to be a United States which is going back to Glass-Steagall. So now what we're going to do is go to high technology. Anything that's going to work is going to be relatively high technology. A lot of the China labor force has been working as cheap labor, according to routine jobs, where they can do the work, put the parts together and so forth, but they're not really generating among themselves the driver program for mass production or mass development. So that has to reverse, because when Europe goes to the final collapse and the US goes to its collapse, what is China going to do? Who's it going to export to? There are no export partners under the way trends are going now. So therefore, what we have to do is we have to do this one thing that any competent economist does. I admit there are very few competent economists on this planet now. We used to have a higher ration of these types. It means we have to go to a higher energy flux density program. It means that we have to do that on the basis of taking our target goal, thermonuclear fusion. That is the only chance for this planet. And what we've gone through already, just in the basement, our base program, we've gone through the evidence. We have enough knowledge of what can be done that we are now situated to know that we could. We're going to have to learn a lot of things in the process, but we know what the technology is. This technology, if applied, will bring us to the greatest leap forward in the history of the human species. And China can be a pilgrim in that process, because China needs it, because it no longer has a European market that's worth anything. It has only a poor U.S. market it's depending upon. So therefore, if China is capable of becoming the keystone of a revival of the planet, and we're talking about going from the Mississippi River westward into the Pacific Ocean, up to the Arctic, and down through deep into Asia. And China becomes then a fulcrum in the whole process. And what we need to do is realize that China can no longer live on the trading partners it's had in Europe and so forth, or even in the United States the way it's been functioning. But we do know that China is now ready, with the right backing, to actually become the fulcrum of a trans-Pacific region, which we would look at, from the Arctic in general. We would look at it from the west of the Mississippi, on across the Pacific, and deep into Asia. Those nations that comprise in that particular area, they are the hope of rebuilding, or starting a rebuilding and going higher of the world as a whole, the planet as a whole. This is what we must do. All this stuff they're talking about is doomed. And people will say, well, it works. It doesn't work. It has not worked.